Hello, I hope you're feeling very good about your quiz and things went well and you understood those negative exponents and had no problem factoring. So now we're continuing to factor, except we're adding and subtracting our rational expressions as opposed to just multiplying and dividing. Multiplying and dividing is a little bit easier because you're just cancel. Remember that satisfaction of just crossing things out. I love that. Here, instead of crossing things out, we're kind of building a fraction to get that common denominator. And when you have polynomials in your denominator, it gets a little bit more complicated. So 5.6 is taking the sums and differences of rational expressions, of those fractions. So what is this strategy? Well, remember, going back old school when you first learned fractions, we have to get a common denominator. So find the least common denominator, lowest common denominator, rewrite each fraction with that lowest common denominator by changing the numerator. You do the addition or subtraction, keeping that denominator the same, right, whatever it happens to be for the least common denominator, and then finally you simplify. So you reduce it. If your final answer is 8/12, we're going to reduce the top and bottom by 4, and we're going to get 2/3. Right, so you have to do that simplifying at the end or the reduction. So to get our brains in the fraction, adding fractions or subtracting fractions, we're going to kind of do just one basic one to get ourselves warmed up, to get ourselves thinking about the process. So if I have 3/10 and I'm adding it to 7/15, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to look at these two numbers and try to figure out what is the common denominator. Sure, we can multiply them together. 10 times 15 is 150, but there's a much smaller number, and that number is 30. So some of you might have seen right away, well, that's 30. So we already have the 3 here and the 7 here. But in order to get this denominator to become 30, the 10, I've got to multiply by 3. Remember, we don't just multiply by 3 in the denominator, we have to multiply by 3 over 3 because that's keeping that fraction equivalent because we're multiplying by a value of 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I have to multiply my numerator by 3 as well. Over here in the second one, in order to get 15 to become a 30, I've got to multiply the denominator by 2, and if I multiply the denominator by 2, I also have to multiply the numerator by 2. So now we can see we're going to have 9 plus 14 over 30. That's 23 over 30, right? We just keep the same denominator, 30 and 30, but we add the numerators. 9 plus 14, that's 23. The last thing you do is you look and see if you can reduce it. Can you simplify 23 over 30? No, you can't, so you're done. You know, let's try slowly with our variables or our monomials in our denominator. I have a 6k, I have a 3k. Remember, the number one thing you have to remember is you can't shrink a number. We couldn't make 10. They both have a 5 in common, but we can't shrink both of these to a 5 as a denominator. So you can't shrink the set 6 into a 3. You can only make these denominators bigger. So if this is a 6k and this is a 3k, my common denominator is going to be 6k. Well, that's nice. This first one already has a 6k, so I'm going to keep that 5 there. And then I'm going to put the minus sign here, and I'm going to put my 4, except my 4 is not quite, shouldn't stay at 4 because this isn't 6k. So I have to multiply the denominator by 2, which means I also have to multiply the numerator by 2. So the 4 has to be multiplied by a 2, or if you wanted to do that in your head, you just could have written 5 minus 8 right here. Right, so what do? We get 5 minus 8, which is negative 3. Right, so 5 minus 8, that's negative 3. Negative 3 divided by 6k, well, the last thing you do is you eyeball it to see if you can reduce. Well, sure, we have a negative 3, 6. So what does that reduce to? It reduced to a negative 1/2. So it's negative 1 over 2k. Okay, next one. We have an a squared and a 2a. Well, remember, you cannot make an a squared shrink down to an a. You can only increase this one to go up to the a squared. So we need to have an a squared. We're looking for our least common denominator. This one has a 2, this one doesn't, so I've got to put in that 2 as well. So I can make this become a 2a squared by multiplying the top and bottom by 2. Right, so I have 2 times the quantity of a minus 1 plus I can make this become 2a squared by multiplying the top and bottom by a. But don't forget, these are quantities that have more than one term, so it's a polynomial or a binomial, so you need to parenthesize that. See how I parenthesized here? So now I'm going to parenthesize, that's going to be an a times a plus 1. So to get this common denominator, 2a squared, I've got to multiply by 2 in the top and bottom, so it's 2 times this quantity. To get this to become 2a squared, I've got to multiply by an a on top and bottom, so I get a times a plus 1. Now I'm going to do the distribution, and I'm going to combine my like terms. So I get 2a minus 2 plus a squared plus a all over 2a squared. Combine your like terms, I have an a squared, I'm going to put it in descending order. Positive a and positive 2a is positive 3a, and then my minus 2 over 2a squared. Now, to simplify, it starts to get a little more complicated here. You've got to see if you can factor this numerator. So can we factor a squared plus 3a minus 2? Well, no, you can't. This minus 2, negative 2 times positive 1, or negative 1 times positive 2, will that add up to be positive 3? No, it won't ever, so you can't factor it. So actually, this is your final answer. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. I got some little extra marks. So it's a squared plus 3a minus 2 divided by 2a squared. So those are all the ones where we didn't have to do any factoring in order to get the common denominator. Now we're going to move on to ones that are a little more complicated, where we're going to have to factor the polynomial in the denominator first, and then get a common denominator based on factoring. So you might look at 5 and say, well, why do I need to factor this? Well, they're not identical. This one has a positive x, a negative y. This one has a positive y, a negative x. Well, if I factor out a negative 1 here, then I can reverse those signs. Right? Then that becomes a positive x and a negative y, which is now identical to this one here. So my y, if I distributed the negative, would go back to positive. If I distribute the negative, it would go back to negative. So for your common denominator, yes, it is x minus y, but we also have this negative 1 that needs to be included in your common denominator. Because this one is missing the negative 1, I've got to multiply the numerator and denominator by a negative 1. This one already has all the pieces. This fraction already has all the pieces. So I can just write the x down here. But then what does this become? Well, it's a positive y times negative 1, which becomes x minus y. Now, whenever you have more than one term in the numerator, I really suggest you put it in parentheses. That way you won't be tempted to cancel individually. This is a quantity together. X minus y makes one numerical value. So if this quantity in parentheses is identical to this quantity in parentheses, then you can cancel it. Are they identical? Yes, they are. So I can simplify on the last step and cancel each of these. But remember, when you cancel something divided by itself, those become 1s. So it's 1 divided by negative 1, because we're multiplying here, which is overall an answer of negative 1. If you're not sure about that, pause. Just have a look at it on your own for a second, try it, and then go back and watch the video again and see if that helps. If you're still confused, just move on, try the other ones. I think they're a little more straightforward. And then you can ask me about that one in class, or if it comes up in homework, try it again, and if you can't do it, then talk to me about it. Okay, number 6. First thing you want to do is factor each denominator. So factoring this denominator, I'm going to factor out my GCF. They both have an x in common. I factor out my GCF, I get x minus 1. This one is the difference of 2 squares, so that factors to x plus 1, x minus 1. Okay, so these are different factors down here. This first fraction had x times x minus 1. My second fraction had x plus 1 times x minus 1. So if I'm putting it all together, what are the factors that need to be down here in the numerator, or sorry, the denominator? Well, I need to take x, I need to take x minus 1, but what does this fraction have that this one doesn't? It has an x plus 1. What does this denominator have that this one doesn't? Well, that's the x. So do I have all the pieces to create a least common denominator? Do I have all the factors? Yes, I do. I have the x minus 1, and I have the x plus 1. So in this first fraction here, I have a 5, and in my second fraction, I have a plus 1 in the numerators. For the denominator of the first fraction, what is it missing? It's missing the x plus 1. So I would have to multiply the denominator and the numerator by x plus 1. So I'm going to multiply this numerator by x plus 1 because I already have it down here in my denominator. On my second one, I'm missing the x, so I've got to multiply by x. So I've got to multiply the denominator and the numerator by x. Now I distribute and combine like terms. Right, so it would be 5x plus 5 plus 1x, or just plus x. So 5x and 1x is equal to 6x plus 5 divided by x times x minus 1 times x plus 1. Can I factor 6x plus 5? Remember that quantity, it's more than one term, you should parenthesize it. Can it be factored? Does it have a GCF? Can we simplify it? No. Is it identical to one of these parentheses down here? No. So therefore, this is the final answer. Now when you do the homework and you check in the back of the book, because I know you all are very good math students, you check your answers in the back of the book. When you do that, the answer in the denominator will not look like this. It will be the FOILed out, it'll be 6x plus 5, and then it'll be all these things multiplied out. So it'll be x cubed, so they would first square this, right, and then it would be x cubed minus, let's see, 2x squared minus x. So this is what you would see in the back of the book instead. Do you have to take the time to FOIL that out or to multiply it all out? No, you do not. I do not want you to take that time. That's just a waste of time, and you might make a mistake, therefore making me have to mark you incorrect. So just leave your answer in this form. Okay, don't worry about taking the extra time to factor if it's not necessary. Now, with that said, don't take the extra time to multiply it out. Okay, it's not necessary. Leave it in factored form so you can see if you can cancel anything. All right, moving on. Number 7. I think we'll have time for this, and then I'll have to do another video. So we have 2u minus v, can't factor it. 2u plus v, can't factor it. But look at this. This is the difference of squares. So it's 2u minus v and 2u plus v. So therefore, what is my common denominator? Well, it has to be both of these factors, 2u minus v and 2u plus v. This first fraction is missing the 2u plus v. So I have to multiply the 3u times the 2u plus v. And then I have to multiply the negative 2u, so notice that negative sign, by the missing factor, which is 2u minus v. And then the final one is plus 2v squared. It already has both factors in its denominator, so there's no need to multiply by anything. So we just keep it as just plus 2v squared. Now you have to distribute, and then you combine your like terms, and then you have to check and see if you can factor it. So distribute, I get 6u squared. Let me do it up here. 6u squared plus 3uv minus 4u squared plus 2uv plus 2v squared. So let's combine our like terms. So here I'm going to get 6u squared and minus 4u squared is 2u squared. Positive 3uv plus positive 2uv is positive 5uv plus 2v squared. Okay, the last thing you have to do is see if the numerator is factorable. And guess what? It is. So how do we factor the numerator? You put 2u plus v, u plus 2v. That gives me 4 and 1, which is the 5uv in the middle. And then what do you see? You see you have an identical parentheses, so we can cancel. So my final answer is u plus 2v divided by 2u minus v. Next video for the last two.